Uh, not really. I think it's important for us to appreciate that we are in a very different context. We've got an economic, we've got a health, as well as a financial crisis. What we've seen in many countries is a huge stimulus, which the South African government under our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, 500 billion stimulus was nothing but just rearranging of the chairs. Not much money has flown into the economy. Therefore, we appreciate his commitment that the private sector is at the center of the economic recovery and resilience, but we're still concerned that the health crisis is going to be with us for a long time. Therefore, extending the TES, that is the unemployment grant of 350 for 3 months, is not enough. We need to think bigger because I think the labor market is very sticky. It's going to be sticky for a longer time, given that the infection, although they'll be low, but they'll be there. And therefore, we need support for those that are jobless for a much longer time than what is proposing.
Yeah, a classic economic thought also speaks of the multiplier effect. Essentially, you give people money, they're able to spend that money, and that in some way generates economic activity and hopefully economic growth. The 350 Rand is meant to, in some part, be aimed at improving the multiplier effect. I mean, do we have any idea about its actually effectiveness in doing exactly that?
We do. I mean, my colleagues were running a mobile survey. In the first round, that is the March last year's first round of level 5, they did some work and showed that at least about 15% of households were going hungry because of jobs being locked because of the regulation, but also having no access to some income. Therefore, that 350 went a long way to try and uplift many households' quality of life because they could buy at least the basic goods and services. However, it is not enough to create a huge multiplier. 350 is just for survival. We need something much bigger than that, maybe between 800 and 1,500, which some of us have argued that is a form of a basic income grant. That won't be temporary. It's going to be here for a longer time. And therefore, South Africa should accept that we're going to have 100% debt to GDP for a longer time because we want to grow our economy and we want to sustain livelihoods by having a basic income grant. Just giving 350 and hope that the labor market will be flexible by December is really, I think, very short term, and it's going to hurt and put many South Africans to higher levels of poverty and some of them to famine because they need income to survive.
Hold up. So you're saying this 350 Rand would be more effective for our economy if it was increased to about 800 or 1,500? I can already hear the opposition asking, where on earth do we think we're going to get all this money?
Everyone is running high debt levels because we've got an economic, we've got a health, as well as a financial crisis. Governments, as you saw, President Biden just came in over 3 weeks ago as the president of the USA. And the first thing is done is to put down a stimulus because American households are struggling out there. Similarly, South African households are struggling. And we're calling upon the president and his cabinet to look at the basic income grant to ensure that we continue going to the market to borrow. Remember that about 85 to 90% of South African government debt is domestic. We pay every month, those of us are still employed, money into asset managers. They could buy a lot of the stock of government to fund these programs, including many programs to stimulate the economy.
Now, Lumkile, you've been part of President Zuma's state-owned enterprises presidential review committee. Given the experience you have from that, were you surprised that there was no mention of SAA yesterday, despite just how much money had been spent into not only keeping the airline afloat, but also turning it around?
Well, he wanted to present a good story. So in a way, he was being sneaky because you know that this government continue to throw good money into pits. So SAA, at least with ESCOM, they're trying now to really open up the market. But they talk about a lot of other SOEs, including State Bank, as the Minister of Finance was tweeting earlier this week. So really, there's a lot of sneakiness. That is why it makes many of us skeptical that, again, some of the things that were said might be PR exercises because this government fails to implement. It likes forming committees to advise us to make decisions when, in fact, the House is burning. So really, we need to see the action coming. You're discussing earlier about the digital migration. 13 years later, we're now going to do it. So it's these issues that makes us more skeptical. And we would like to see government that implements than have PR shows to try and win hearts and minds when it cannot fulfill the promises that it makes.
Yeah. What else do you feel was just platitudes from yesterday?
In fact, what excited me, Ayanda, was really the energy plan, where at last we're seeing a huge movement and acceptance. In fact, I think Mr. Mantashe, as powers have been accepted by the president. And I think many people are disappointed because there was no nuclear talk. I don't know whether in the RP or the expedited RP of 2,500, which NERSA has issued a request for information and a request for proposal, whether that's going to stick. So we're seeing some commitment to some global issues. That's a Paris Agreement around climate change. So whether President Ramaphosa's announcement will be accepted by the DMRE and NERSA coming to the party, and the speed at which the rollout of the transition to low carbon economy is going to take place remains to be seen. Remember that in the industrialization process, Minister Patel likes state control and likes high tariffs. We need to allow more competition there. For example, the bigger players upstream have to allow really the lower players to import some of the raw materials so that we can build a competitive downstream sector. So how the industrialization takes place remains to be seen, because we know that there's a lot of appetite of state control and of intervening in markets, hurting the downstream industry, which can absorb jobs and create opportunities and innovate, because that's the game in town in this century.
Yeah, but we also know that it's not a cheap exercise to try to get into the energy sector. There are many barriers to entry, and that also risks, I guess, the democratization being limited to people who have access already. What ought the Energy Department, government, the president do to try and at least expand this so that there are more players that are able to actually leverage off the opportunity that this comes with?
Unfortunately, there's no luxury for that. I think a lot of the people who like to see more black people in the sector, we are teaching online. I'm talking to you online. There are interruptions because the infrastructure on ICT is weak. The infrastructure on energy is weak, and the generation is weak. So we require to do now, and then we can deliver these services better. And then we can think about transformation. At this juncture, it is key for us to have service delivery to get South Africans to work and learn in my sector. So really, for me, I want action. Don't tell me about transformation PE. I want delivery of services. I want to be able to do my work and deliver on knowledge so that through learning, we can innovate and compete, and that process transform.
I'm sure you'll agree with me. That's an incredibly controversial statement to be making. You suggesting that we should allow transformation to be on the back burner, do what it needs to happen to try and ensure that change actually takes place.
Absolutely. The transformation that we've seen favors the politically connected and the few. The majority of us who like services have to pay high cost for something that benefits a few elite. We want to have universal access to these services by ensuring that they're cheap, they're affordable. Whether they're being brought by X or Y or Z, it doesn't matter. As long as our economy grows, as long as we move forward, and whilst we fight the struggle for transformation.
I think you'll agree with me. You've just opened a whole can of worms, but I'm going to have to leave our discussion there. Thanks very much for your insight. Certainly appreciate it. And this is definitely going to be one of the moments that's going to spark a charged debate, I imagine, on places like social media. But thanks very much for coming on.